There's a bunch going on in Palestine right now. In March 6th, just over 2 months ago, you had a Palestinian activist who was executed by the Israel forces and the Palestinian Authority. They were colluding together. Palestinian Authority under Fatah, under Mahmoud Abbas, and the Israel Armed Forces colluded together in order to murder 31-year-old Basil al-Araj, B-A-S-E-L Al-A-R-A-J. So Basil al-Araj. It says here, Ramallah. Israeli forces shot dead a Palestinian activist early Monday morning, culminating a 2-hour-long gun battle in Ramallah area of the central-occupied West Bank after Israeli forces had been pursuing the man since he was released from Palestinian prison last September. This entire case just is insanity, okay? So there's a hunger strike, and he's with these other guys, and they're in a Palestinian prison, and then Palestine lets them go because of all the protests that were happening, so they just let him go without charges. But as soon as they let him go, then the Israeli forces are chasing him down. So the Palestinian Authority tried to make good on this, right? Like, oh, no, we let the prisoners go, but then they allowed the Israeli forces to hunt them down. And then there's this one guy who said he used to be a friend to him, but since he turned violent, now he's just so disappointed in him. Well, if you actually read the entire thing, okay, so April of last year, he was detained without charges or explanation by Palestinian security forces, alongside with Haitham Siyaj and Muhammad Harb. The controversial case made headlines when the three men joined other detainees in a hunger strike in a Palestinian prison amid reports of torture and mistreatment. Totally fucked up, right? So they had detained the 6 men. They released them in September, and then the Palestinian Authority had been criticized for their revolving door policy of just funneling Palestinians from the Palestinian jail to Israeli prison. So there is no doubt in my mind that Basil al-Araj would have been in an Israeli prison had he been, if he would have just stayed right there. But instead they were forced to let him go. Now, out of the 6 men who were released, they've already got 4 of them. So Muhammad Harb, Haitham Siyaj, Muhammad al-Salaman, and Seif al-Idrissi were eventually detained by Israeli forces and ordered to administrative detention, imprisonment without charge or trial, while a video was released by Israeli media showing Israeli forces beating Siyaj in custody. So that's what al-Araj is looking at. This is in the West Bank, okay? So this is in the Fatah-controlled, the Mahmoud Abbas's party. Now, the Israeli forces, once Basil al-Araj was allowed to leave the prison, there was a months-long manhunt that continued until March 6th, the Monday morning raid, when forces from the Israeli army, the Israeli border police, Israeli intelligence, and Israel's counter-terrorism units surrounded a house in the outskirts of the refugee camp of Kadara, where al-Araj was allegedly staying. And they said once Israeli forces arrived at the place, the Palestinian terrorists, of course, opened fire at Israeli forces. So it doesn't matter that Israel has totally surrounded him. It doesn't matter that they're about to take al-Araj and they're going to beat him and torture him in prison. And for what? I mean, so far, there's without charges, right? So it would be crazy just to be... the spokesperson says that there was an exchange of fire between the Israeli forces and the Palestinian terrorists, and that's what led to his death. An exchange of gunfire. So nice, even exchange. No Israel soldiers were injured in the shootout, so not really an even exchange. And then they said that went for 2 hours until al-Araj ran out of ammunition. So when he had a gun, when he was shooting, he was still alive. So for the people that say that he just needs to, be nonviolent and bow his head and just go ahead and, be whisked off into a prison, you have no idea what happens. People starve to death in the prisons, right? Milosevic, he died in The Hague, and then you had Toussaint Louverture, who died in France. So to assume that just being stowed away in prison is like a better fate, the level you submit to is the level of injustice that's perpetuated upon you. Shared by Israeli police showed Israeli forces entering a home and firing heavily towards an overhead crawl space. It remained unclear whether the video showed the exact moment when al-Araj was shot and killed and whether he first opened fire. As per Israel claims. So he first opened fired, right? Is that what they're trying to say? Israeli forces also fired an Energia anti-tank rifle grenade into the building, causing the destruction of parts of the house. Witnesses say they saw Israel forces dragging a man's body by his feet outside the house. Palestinian Ministry of Health was reportedly confirmed al-Arraj's death, according to online media reports, while his body was taken by Israeli forces to an unknown destination. So they're taking his body to use it as leverage. We'll give you the body back, but don't be violent. Don't you be violent. So Basil al-Araj was 31 years old. He was from the village of al-Walaja in the southern occupied West Bank district of Bethlehem. His home there had been raided several times a week by Israeli forces in recent months in their pursuit of him, according to the locals. After he was killed, there was a bunch of riots, clashes erupted between local Palestinians who started throwing rocks at Israeli soldiers who responded by opening fire, and they injured 2 Palestinians. And they were shot in the lower parts of their bodies, and they were evacuated by the Palestinian Red Crescent crews for treatment. Well, this is big. According to the Israeli people, right, he's the head of a terrorist cell that planned attacks against Israelis. One of his friends is criticizing him. I can't believe he did this. I don't think he had any other choice. He's being chased by all these gunmen, right? The intelligence, the army, the navy, everybody's after this guy. You know what? He's just supposed to submit. On and on about, America has a contingency plan to invade Canada. They have a plan. There's a plan written down, and it's a contingency plan just in case. So they're saying because this guy had a plan and he had some weapons, then that's the reason why he needed to be taken down. But it seemed like they had targeted him way before. If anything, they radicalized him. I mean, it's just, they said, let's see, according to the Palestinian Authority, they said that they were just going to question him and Harb and Siad, his 2 buddies, and then they were going to return them to their families. And then later on they said, well, then we found grenades and camping equipment, and we thought the camping equipment was going to be used to attack, Israel. So where do you come up with this stuff? And they're saying that, let's see, 3 men were tracked down and arrested. They're planning an attack. In this context, our security cooperation with Israel is functioning well. So yeah, Abbas is bragging about it. Fada, he's bragging, saying that a Palestinian who is suspected of masterminding a deadly shooting of a Palestinian police officer was reportedly beaten to death while in custody by Palestinian security forces. After he was arrested in the old city of Nablus in northern occupied West Bank. Nablus Governor Akram Rujub was quoted by the official Palestinian news agency Wafa saying the suspect, nicknamed Abu al-Iz Halawi, was arrested in a very precise operation minutes after he entered a house in Nablus. Then they beat the guy. So they're not even saying who the guy's name is. Halawi. Abu al-Iz Halawi. Okay. Nicknamed, that's not a nickname, that's first, middle, and last. Abu al-Iz Halawi. Usually Spike, right? Beaver. Hey, Beaver. That's a nickname. So this guy, he was killed while in police custody. Basil al-Araj was a nonviolent peace activist, nonviolent writer, peace activist, and apparently when he was getting thrown in jail and then all of Israel's armed forces were after him, that's when he started to get, radicalized, if you want to even say that. But I'm not even convinced of that. He could have just had those guns. He had, AK or something, like 3 major guns, and he had enough ammunition to, sustain a sort of a hunkered down firefight, but it wasn't a fair firefight. So I just don't believe that, what they're trying to say is that these guns and the plans he was going to do all this. I don't believe you. I mean, I feel like that's like thought crime and shit, and it's an extrajudicial execution. There was no, court. There was no formal charges. There was no evidence presented. Somebody just said he needed to die, and then, Abbas went ahead and allowed that shit to happen. Now Abbas wants people to vote for the Fatah. No wonder Abbas. Activists is calling for real justice for Basil al-Araj, the prosecution and accountability of all those responsible for his execution, the immediate release of his body, as well as his imprisoned comrades and all 7,000 Palestinian prisoners of freedom in the jails of the occupation. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is also boycotting the Fatah elections, described al-Araj as a freedom fighter and electional theorist who is one of the most prominent young Palestinian strugglers to resist the Israeli occupation, who worked to chronicle the history of Palestine and confront all attempts to liquidate the Palestinian cause. So it doesn't seem like he's not saying, wipe out Israel. He's just saying save Palestine. Save Palestine. The group said the killing laid bare an urgent need to confront all forms of security coordination, political arrest, prosecutions by the Palestinian Authority, the PA, describing the security coordination with Israel as a betrayal of the principles and values of the Palestinian resistance. Loyalty to the martyr. A spokesperson, however, said they were really pissed off about it. They condemned the killing and the injury of the two who tried to save face and prevent the raid. So they're saying the two who try to save face and prevent the raid. I don't know who that is. And then they said that this is just another incident, another escalation by Israel against the Palestinians. Then they pointed out that Israel forces had detained 12 Palestinians overnight on Sunday without any justification. And then the Fatah spokesperson Abu Zayed denounced the illegal Israeli operation, described it as a hideous act of occupation, and noted that the pictures taken at the scene showed a large amount of bullets fired by Israeli forces in the execution. And that's true. There's a picture there with like a dozen bullets. So you're inside your house. Why'd they have to shoot a dozen bullets? They needed to riddle his body, with a shit ton of bullets. That's out of anger. That's out of malice. That's out of vengeance. That's not out of justice. So for half a year until he was killed, the Israeli forces are chasing him down, and his friend still doesn't understand any of this. His friend is still saying, I'm sad. It's a personal loss that he had to have gone this route. Well, if it's true that Basil al-Araj was going to, implement this violent plan, he had 6 months to do it. He had 6 months to do it. And if he had 6 months to do it, why didn't he do it in those 6 months? So he didn't have a plan. He wasn't going to shoot out anybody. He might have thought something here or there, but really he's a man on the run. He just wants to not get shot. And guess what? He got shot. And so to protect himself from not getting shot, he, got a couple guns. So, there's just so much shit that's happening in Palestine. This is one, but this is one of the reasons why the elections that are happening today is in dispute. Palestinian Authority is a subcontractor for the occupation. They're a subcontractor for the Israeli army. So Fatah Abbas, he's very unpopular in Palestine, but he's going to talks with Russia, having talks with Trump, having talks with everybody, right? After these elections, he should be booted out. He should have been booted out in 2009. That was the end of his term. He wasn't even elected. It should be Hamas that's actually running everything. If you were to listen to the parliamentary elections in 2006, Hamas swept the elections. But because of a civil war, because of Fatah's civil war, because of Fatah probably being financed from outside sources, right, they wanted to make sure Hamas got no political power whatsoever. If the election had been held up in 2006, I think we'd be having a completely different conversation right now. But instead, now we're going to decide who is going to take over for Abbas, who's illegitimate. There's two other names here I want to mention, Abdullah Shalada and Mu'taz Washaha. So Mu'taz Washaha and Abdullah Shalada. So Abdullah Shalada was one of the Palestinian strugglers who had been killed in the hospital. And then Mu'taz Washaha was a former prisoner and also a struggler. So, they're just killing people left and right. There's a big hunger strike that's going on in the Palestinian jails right now, and the Palestinian authorities in the West Bank. And this Palestinian is shot dead in Israeli undercover raid on the West Bank hospital. So they said he was a suspect in a stabbing of an Israeli settler 2 weeks ago. Israeli forces disguised in Palestinian clothes, including one who did something impersonating a pregnant woman in a wheelchair. So Abdullah Shaladel killed as he emerged from a bathroom in the ward where his cousin, a Hamas member, was being treated for gunshot wounds. So that's how they killed him, right? They tracked him down in the hospital, and he was there with his friend. And they said that this is in Hebron, Flashpoint City, shooting dead a relative of the man suspected of carrying out a stabbing attack. The operation involving 24 undercover soldiers and Shin Bet agents somewhere in fake beards took place early hours of Thursday morning. 24 undercover soldiers. 24. for this one guy, Shin Bet agents, wearing fake beards, pretending to be pregnant women, so they could kill this 27-year-old Abdallah Shaladeh. And then this other man, Wutaz Washala, murdered by Israel as peace talks continue. So that's not peace, right? Talking about the state of his house. There's a curtain on the window from which Basil al-Araj 34 would look out onto Ramallah. Slightly drawn back, you got water bottles lining the edge of the window. In an old house in the city where he went into hiding more than 2 months ago, cigarette butts are scattered on the table next to a set of books that Basil spent his time reading. A cup of coffee still sits next to the last meal he consumed, which included some beans. Dried blood stains on the floor of the house. At 2 a.m. on the morning of March 6th, the sound of gunfire reverberated through the streets of Ramallah before the Israeli army announced they had killed the man they'd been hunting for months. This is from Al Jazeera. Basil, a well-respected figure by Palestinians across the spectrum, was known for his activism and resistance to the ongoing Israeli occupation. He led a youth movement against what he believed were the dangers of normalization with Israel and simultaneously organized protests in Ramallah, the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority, a semi-governmental body. Mahmoud Abbas is bragging about this. Just the other day, we caught 3 men, tracked down, arrested them. They're planning attack, and, our security cooperation with Israel is functioning well, so there's no secret. They are coordinating. They are the subcontractor for the Israeli occupation. The Palestinian Authority, fuck the Palestinian Authority. That's why I don't like Hamas. My friend criticized me saying that I need to focus on labor movements, labor worker parties. I mean, if you don't have a peaceful setting, it seems like you need to get the security situation settled before, caring about labor movements. Labor is on the ropes anyways. And so, it just, when it comes to Abbas, he's sitting there bragging that, Basil and al-Arraj was killed. And, they had been arrested April 2016 near the village of Aurora, north of Ramallah, claiming the young men had unlicensed weapons and they were going to carry out an attack on Israeli targets. Where'd they get this info? The 6 men had been thrown in prison, but they went on a hunger strike for 8 or 9 days, spurring a popular movement to the press for the release. Then they were released in September, and Basil went into hiding and been wanted by Israel ever since. September, October, November, December, till March. Yep, for 6 months. 6 months! And when they said that they lived extremely difficult times in the prisons, they were chained by their arms. They're being beaten. They're being tortured. They were detained for 6 months under the pretext of legal procedures, but prosecutors were not serious about the investigation. After Basil's release, he took refuge in the rented house in Ramallah. The owner of the house said Basil had told her he was a Swedish expatriate and spoke in English. He never left the house and would serve me coffee every time I came to collect the rent. So she didn't know what was up. His family's house is back in al-Walaja near the city of Bethlehem. It was raided by the Israeli army countless times as they embarked on a manhunt. So Basil had studied pharmaceutical science in Egypt, so Basil al-Araj was educated. He also lectured on resistance, gave political tours on the Palestinian history of dispossession. He was known for protests in his hometown near the illegal Israeli settlement of Gilo, G-I-L-O, where Israel's separation wall has eaten up a portion of his family's land. So this is personal to him. This is his family's land, right? These illegal settlements, this occupation, they've seen encroaching, taking more and more, and then they took a piece of his family's land. Rachel Corrie got ran over by an Israeli Defense Forces bulldozer. So he is one of 3 million other Palestinians in the occupied West Bank who required difficult to obtain Israeli permits to enter Jerusalem, but he decided to defy Israel's occupation. In 2010, Basil boarded a bus filled with settlers and managed to enter Jerusalem. He said, "Jerusalem is my city and I have a right to enter it." So, in a final letter that Basil left inside the house, he wrote, "Greetings of Arab nationalism, homeland and liberation. Now I am walking to my fated death, satisfied that I have found my answers. Is there anything more clear than a martyr's deed?" No, there is not, Mr. Basil al-Araj. Basil al-Araj. So 2-hour shootout with the fugitive. They said it's a turning point. So I don't know. This guy, I mean, if you don't want to go out like a chump, right? To be sitting and rotting away in jail. That's not how power works. You might be able to survive if you're just a rat looking to survive, but if you're a man and you have dignity and you want to be respected, and you don't want to go through the humiliation of being subjected to somebody else, the torture. At a party, the spokesperson said they were pissed off about it. They said, look at all the bullets. They said they were outraged. But then you had Abbas, who's in Germany, sitting there saying, well, look, we're getting these terrorists, right? We're helping Israel get these terrorists. So is that why they're doing it, just so he can tell the German newspaper that, you know, hell, we're doing a good job? And then after Araj died, and then 4 of the men are in Israel detention in a prison right now, right, which is where he would have ended up, the Palestinian Authority carried on with the charges. They carried on with the courts, and they said that even though, you know, he's dead, they want to judge him. They still want to judge him. The Palestinian Authority were the ones who had imprisoned Basil al-Araj in the past, and today they want to judge him. It was because of, you know, the Palestinian Authority and Abbas and Fatah. That is why al-Araj, Basil al-Araj, is dead. Basil al-Araj, his body had 21 bullets in it, and then they said that the kill shot was a shot into his heart, even though there were several shots in his head. So I guess they wanted to just mess up his head and his face. And he's 34 years old, killed March 6th, and it said that they had raided his family homes 11 times between October and March. Right, just go into the home and, you know, ramshack it, flip everything over, and just, you know, make hell for his family members. Israeli forces held the body of al-Araj for 11 days before releasing the remains to the family around 3 p.m. on Friday. Mourners speculated the Israeli authorities released the body later in the day so the funeral would end just at nightfall, and clashes between youth and Israeli soldiers in al-Walajah and Bethlehem City could be avoided. Generally, the funerals for Palestinians killed by Israeli forces, considered martyrs by the Palestinian population, would happen just after noon prayer. So Israel's got this down on lockdown, right? They had this whole thing, this operation from start to finish, right? It was the intelligence forces, it was the army, it was the police, and then they take his body, and the reason why they took his body, I think, is so they can make sure that these funerals, they think, oh man, this is a Palestinian, you know, this is an activist, this is somebody huge in the community, this is, he was executed, it was an assassination of a budding political, this is a, you know, a Fred Hampton murder. So this is, you know, a young Fred Hampton is killed, so not only, where was he going to go, what was he going to do, he could have done so many things. And, but instead, you know, they killed him, and they're expecting protest, and so they hold the body for 11 days, and then they give it to him right before, you know, nighttime, so that way the curfew, get everybody in bed, and then, you know, come back the next day. All of them were waving Palestinian flags. Palestinians are waving Palestinian flags because they believed al-Araj's beliefs. Some people think there's a one-state solution. Some think that there are two. He believed that, you know, fuck the bullshit. He was sick of the corruption. He was sick of collaborating with Israel, and he was pro-Palestine. And so 50 Israeli soldiers were standing in riot gear at the entrance to the settlement. So they were, you know, ready for this. The separation wall hems the main road of the village, leaving mourners to march along the side of the wall from the heart of the village to the cemetery. Palestinian Authority, get out. Soldiers, get out. The marchers chanted in Arabic during the funeral procession, along with Palestinian Authority, your mask has come off. Demiri, where are you? Where are you? Here is Basil. He took your eye, referring to Adnan Demiri, a PA security spokesperson. On Sunday, PA forces attacked and beat Palestinian protesters gathered outside a PA courthouse to protest Basil's death. So there's a picture of a gun here, a Carlo rifle. So a Carlo rifle, and then two M16. So there's no AKs. Two M16 and a Carlo rifle were found in a search of al-Araj's home. So, okay, he had a couple that said rifles. I only see a picture of one rifle here. So, okay, so he had two M16s and a Carlo rifle. So what? He was able to elude the Israeli forces for 6 months. That's what pissed him off the most, probably. And then instead of peacefully submitting to them, he shot back at him. And that's probably the bit, how dare you? How dare you? You're supposed to just, yes, mass, so whatever you say, mass, and just go on, you know, politely on down the road. So he read 3,000 books before he was killed. The educated coward and the uneducated fighter. He didn't want that. He didn't want that distinction. He wanted to be an educated fighter. And so his ideas were probably given. He was well known. He was well known. That's what his crime was. Basil al-Araj, was part of the Palestinian freedom rides. He was part of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. He had, his background in popular campaigns. He wrote prolifically. He had a lot of commentary. He was well known. So that's essentially, there's been 109 Palestinians who have been killed by Israel this last year, 2016. 109 Palestinians. Is there a war going on? Why are they killing so many? The biggest insult against a martyr would be to say that he was obedient, submissive, and polite in the face of his killer. Basil once said, "Is there anything more eloquent and clearer than a martyr's deed?" Basil's earlier imprisonment and torture by the Palestinian Authority, which led inevitably to his pursuit and killing by Israel, made his death a potent catalyst for outrage. So, R.I.P. Basil al-Araj. R.I.P.